Hi, I'm Sandy Sims with SDS Digital and the Accord Sequarallel. This video tutorial, the fourth part of the TRAX Tracker series, will cover the TRAX Quick-Box itself and TRAX-related CV modes. I've already created a simple track sequence for the purpose. As you can see, 4 steps are a note in each lane. Then 2 4-note chords play in the last 4 steps. Exiting out of the grid, let's have a look at the TRAX drop-down buttons. Just click and then scroll down. First is the solo, which shows this little S always, followed by the mute, which will always show a little X. Next is the levels quick box. This will attenuate the velocities of all notes in this TRAX number. There is no CC7 MIDI level, as this can be controlled in note effects or from a MIDI push quick box or via MIDI input from a controller. Next is TRAX swing. This is non-linearly added to the song effects master swing, so is affected by that. TRAX swing, though, can go all the way to 99% either way. Swing in TRAX shifts every second step, but only with multiplied clocks, not divided ones, which is logical. The plus side is really shuffle, while the minus side is advanced before the clock and then reversed. As you can hear, the note lengths will compensate for the swing, even when lengths are set shorter. Let's have a look at the grid for a moment. Under the swing quick box is a variable size swing mask sequencer that steps with the main clock, not the TRAX clock. Let's mask swing on some clocks. In this example, TRAX is stepping at 2 times clock, so each block represents 2 steps. Thus, only 4 blocks are sequenced for every TRAX loop. I'll shorten the sequence as 16 blocks is taking 4 TRAX loops. Taking the sequence size down to 3 will add some variety. Let's have a look at the grid now. I'll turn swing off, as this will cause variance in the upcoming CV mode section. Next is the TRAX note mirror quick box. This very odd addition will mirror notes around the note you set it at. In the user's manual, there's a horizontal diagram, but here I'll show you it in a vertical format. It's more like a double mirror. Notes above the mirror get reflected below, and notes below the mirror get reflected above. Under the mirror quick box are a couple of settings. The first is a useful octave snap. It steps in sixes because 6 mirrored makes 12 semitones, right? So it's like an inversion from wherever you have set it before turning it on. You may have noticed some rogue notes. This has to do with the upper and lower limits of the mirror. These are limits at which notes, after being mirrored, will be aborted, so it prevents ridiculously high or low notes from getting played. I'll set the full range and you'll hear those perhaps less wanted notes. Some notes may get dumped if they are even less than 0, because MIDI can't go less than note 0. The same applies with greater than note 127. So this can semi-mirror over a range, producing interesting results. Mirror is a really fun way to change the tone of a song or sequence. Consonance becomes dissonance and vice versa, mirroring the mood really completely. If you want to limit mirror notes though, the limit quick box coming up will do that. Let's return mirror to 0 for now. Next is the scale quantizer. Scale affects all letters in this TRAX Quick-Box, so is useful for rounding up more random notes from note effects, etc., or just matching other sequences. Keep in mind that song effect scales can override this scale setting. Under the Scale Quick Box is where you can set the 4 user scales for all TRAX trackers. They're the same as editor scales covered in TRAX Part 3. The song scales can be different from loop to loop, but there's an option here to copy a scale from song effects to here. This TRAX transpose can also be set here as well, as in its own quick box. It's the same thing. Okay, I'll set scale to do a minor and show you how it works with mirror. Next is the limit quick box, which is rather needed with all of these high notes now. You can limit the high notes lower or the low notes higher with this same quick box. Just watch which way the arrow is pointing. Now they're really high. Last for effects is transpose, which is just quicker to get at here than in the scales menu. Record is covered in a different tutorial, but under it there's all kinds of settings for recording to a TRAX tracker's grid. Lastly, there's delete button. This will prompt yes or no as a safeguard. If this TRAX number is not the highest TRAX button, then it will display erase, which will only erase all the sequences, but the Quick-Box will remain. So that's it for the TRAX Quick-Box section of this tutorial. The second half of this tutorial is on different ways to send tracks to the gate and CV jacks via CV mode. CV mode selects the source for each gate and CV jack row, and also the CC 1 to 6 jacks. We'll be using the same track sequence as before. I'll turn down MIDI so all we hear is the 3 VCOs patched in, with gate and CV, from the top 3 rows. CV mode 1 sources are all set to MIDI Channel 1, which is what the TRAX is sending on. The ORD Quick-Box sets how these notes are distributed to the jacks. Order stack simply stacks them. Stack uses notes on or release times to stack as shown in the diagram. These settings can be found under the Stack Quick-Box. Release set to no notes will reset to the top if no more notes are on, while set to time will also allow notes to be off for a certain amount of time before resetting position in the stack. The release time is in 1/24 or clock ticks. Keep in mind that the track steps are going twice as fast with its clock's ×2 multiplier, so whole steps are only 12 ticks here. Notice once set to over 12, the notes start stacking even though they are finished with each step. The green LEDs indicate this. Setting it right at 12 could go either way depending on the clock source stability. The reason the notes are missing is because jack row 4 is still in the mix, but there's no VCO patched into it. You can use CV mode to remove certain jacks from certain sources. I'll do this in a moment. While we're here though, let's look at the last option. This selects what to do with the chords or stacks that are greater than the limit, which is 4 in this case. The default is ignore, so they'll just disappear. Or they can wrap back up to the top to replace the first note. Or they can pile up at the end so the last jack would play all the overflowing notes. So let's remove jack 4 from this source in CV mode. Jack 4 could be from any other source as it would become invalid from this TRAX MIDI Channel 1 source. I'll just set it to none for now. Now when I change the overload notes, you can hear the difference. Notice how the second and third notes are on Gate CV row 2? This is because the note is the same, which is the nature of a MIDI source. Why play the same note on 2 different jacks? The next CV mode order is range, but I'll skip over that as it just sends notes to jacks according to their note region, like a 4-way split keyboard. Most are going to row 4 because they're high. Cycle is unlike stack because it sends notes to jacks in sequence rather than stacking them. As you can see though, it can have multiple jacks on at once. That's because the chords all fire within the release time, which defaults to 1 tick. Setting the release time higher than the note length, the notes start to cycle. The cycle direction is up or down, or up and down, but always starts at the topmost jack. Minimum time is so that very short notes, like a ratchet, will stay on the same jack rather than quickly cycling, unless that's what you want. This can be set with the general idea that this is the speed I don't want jack cycling at, and then set one higher. The next order is random. When using MIDI as a source, like we are with TRAX right now, the notes trickle down through the probabilities set. This means generally you'd want the top row to be fairly low so notes can trickle down through to the next and so on. This adds an extra dimension to the whole thing as it prevents notes going through that have already been played on a higher row before. Now we can hear most of the notes, only less than 1%, will fall into row 4, where there's no VCO patched in. They're cumulative, right? I'm not going deep into the CV Arpeggiator as this is covered in a different video, but suffice to say, the tracks can only arpeggiate when the CV mode is getting the track source via MIDI, not direct. This is for obvious reasons as tracks can put out a huge amount of notes and that would nullify any arpeggiation anyway. Plus TRAX has its own micro arp, so... Nonetheless, using TRAX over MIDI is a way to get order Arpeggiator going. Otherwise, it bypasses. When the CV mode source is not MIDI output, but TRAX number direct, CV mode goes into a more lane-oriented mode. I will change to CV mode number 2, so CV mode number 1 can stay the way it is. Selecting a track source changes the settings somewhat. It also frees up a MIDI channel if you want to turn MIDI off in the track setup. So let's set jack row 1 source to our TRAX 1A. Now lane 1 is feeding directly to gate and CV row 1. And change row 2 to the same. Which defaults to lane 2. This is selecting only TRAX 1A for the source. There is also a TRAX 1 All selection if you want all of the TRAX 1's letters to source the jacks. Row 4 could be from another source as well, like a layers output. Or one of the above could be MIDI, so the ARP could be still used. So there's a CV mode 2 setup for direct TRAX lanes. As I mentioned, stack, range, and cycle no longer have any effect. But random still does. Random operates differently now with tracks directly sourcing lanes. Each jack's probability is unrelated to the previous jacks. So with chords you can specify the chances each part of the chord will play. We still have the two notes the same from mirror and scale, so I'll change those back. So to return to the TRAX MIDI CV mode, just switch back to the CV mode 1. This can be done on the fly and via remote, so adds a lot of flexibility to what's being presented to the Gate, CC and CV rows. Now they're all being sourced by TRAX 1A, and because the lanes are locked to the jacks, other modifications can safely be added. Like glide. Putting glide on lane 1 will glide from note to note on lane 1 only. Have a listen. TRAX CV output setting can also be changed away from outputting all 4 lanes all of the time. You might want TRAX 1A to output to the gate and CV while TRAX 1B sends to a different row. Keep in mind we're still using the random order here. This way each lane in a track sequence can be truly isolated from others. By the way, while using jacks for tracks directly, the CV Arpeggiator still responds to the MIDI input as long as the channel is the same as set, and the MIDI or link merge is on in CV mode. It is by default. Now let's add another TRAX letter and copy A into B. This is to demonstrate each TRAX letter using same or different CV jacks. Shifting these all up 3 to start at E flat will facilitate the difference. Now into playlist to add it to TRAX 1A. I could have just done a playlist block transpose on TRAX 1B with the same results. CV mode is where TRAX 1A is directly sending its notes. But notice we can't hear TRAX 2 on the VCO when switching to CV mode 2. This is because the source is TRAX 1A and needs to now be TRAX 1 all. So Gate and CV1 is now playing all TRAX letters from lane 1, while the rest are still playing lanes 2 and 3 from TRAX 1A. Gate and CV row 2 is still playing only notes from TRAX 1A, lane 2. Let's set Gate and CV row 3 to play all notes on MIDI out channel 1. Setting Gate and CV row 2 to play all lanes of TRAX 1A causes notes that aren't played by Gate and CV row 1 to be played here, because they are set to the same source. Thus, Gate and CV row 2 is now playing lanes 2, 3, and 4. Now just lane 4. And just lane 2. Now let's go back into TRAX 1A. Setting other than lanes 1 to 4 can be a little confusing, but when switching CV modes to select an entirely different set of sources to the jacks, you may want to filter in this way. In setup, I'll change the CV output to send only lane 4. Now neither Gate and CV 1 or 2 is sending. Lane 1, lane 2, lane 3, or none. Most of the time you will likely be just leaving this at 1 to 4. For Gate and CV sources from MIDI or link out, the channel can be used to selectively direct tracks to jacks, and using the order Quick-Box rules as before by stacking, cycling, ranges, or probability. Plus you get arpeggio that way too. As you can see, strategically setting the sources and lanes can accommodate pretty much any possibility, which is what makes the Gate CV jacks entirely flexible. I hope you have enjoyed this video tutorial, and that you have a better understanding of the way CV mode works with TRAX trackers, and in general. I'm Sandy Sims. Keep on patching!